And we are back. Pat Buchanan, Ralph Nader, welcome back. Pat Buchanan, Enron, you see any wrongdoing by anybody?
Well, I think it's I think what Mr. Rubin did. I don't see any explanation for it. There's Citigroup has $750,000 in loans out to Enron. $750 million, and he's the former Secretary of the Treasury, and he calls the Treasury Department of the United States, and they talk about whether or not, to help Enron with its credit rating. For what purpose? So Citigroup can drop a lot of this paper on somebody else?
But he said he was told no, and he agreed with that decision.
But what is he doing calling up the United States Treasury for in any event? What was the purpose of it if not to fix the credit rating? And if you're going to fix the credit rating, what for? Other than to help Citigroup maybe pass off some of this paper to some of their unsuspecting banker friends.
How about the Bush administration?
Well, all I've seen so far in the Bush administration is they're all very close to these fellows. They got a lot of friends. Enron guys ran to their friends for help when they were going under, and they didn't get any help. I haven't seen anything yet that is hard, that's wrong, that the Bush folks have done.
Ralph Nader?
Enron is symbolic of the corruption of corporate politics. Not only did they pay their way in Texas and Washington, as Texans for Public Justice has been documenting, corrupting the election process, corrupting the regulatory process. But look what they've done to their shareholders, inflating the earnings, they sucked the shareholders in, and they've lost almost everything. Look what they've done to their employees. Employees laid off, their 401k pension plans, worthless. They were tied in knots. They couldn't sell the Enron stock when it was 60, 70, 80. But the top executives in the last year sold $1 billion worth of stock. They bailed out while the workers were shafted. And what this can produce in terms of a major corporate crime reform program in America is a much tougher Securities Exchange Commission, cracking down on the giant accounting firms so they don't have this conflict of interest, a much tougher movement in Congress to give shareholders, the owners of American corporations, more power to hold their corporations accountable, and cracking down on the crooks. It's time for crime in the suites to end up in jail.
Tim, I would say, as someone who had Enron preferred in his retirement account, I couldn't agree more. It's the Enron people. This really is scoundrel time. These guys sitting up there know it's going under. They're selling off all their stocks, making all this money, and locking the small investors into steerage as the ship goes down. It's really squalid behavior on their part. But again, I would be right on top of the Republicans, frankly, if they had done something. But everything I've seen is that Secretary of Commerce, they got the phone calls and said sorry.
Let me turn to the election of 2000 for a moment, then we'll get to your books. I want to show you, Pat Buchanan, some interesting numbers on the screen. Iowa, Wisconsin, New Mexico, and Oregon. George Bush lost by the totals there you see in the column. And your vote total in those states is next to it. You got more votes than Bush lost by in those 4 states. If your name had not been on the ballot, and Bush would have gotten a reasonable percentage of the voters who were voting for you, he may have won those 30 electoral votes, and that would have meant he didn't have to win Florida. He would have been president without Florida. Did you ever at night say, oh my God, I may help elect Al Gore?
Listen, all during the last couple of weeks of the campaign, I could see my tombstone, here lies Pat Buchanan, he elected Al Gore. Look, Tim, I went at this thing, and my goal was to create a new America First, pro-life, economically patriotic party that believed in federalism and would downsize the federal government dramatically. I failed. Having failed, I did not want in the final days to destroy the Republican Party's chances to get rid of Bill Clinton and Al Gore. So at the end of the campaign, clearly, I preferred Mr. Bush, and you should put up the Florida numbers where we were able to help him out a little bit.
Well, I'm going to do that. This is the famous butterfly ballot. I'll show it on the screen. There it is. You can see Pat Buchanan's name, Al Gore's name next to each other, which according to the Palm Beach Post, this headline, a ballot designed to confuse voters into choosing 2 candidates cost Al Gore 6,607 votes in Palm Beach County. And all of the state of Florida, 66 counties, Buchanan got 14,000 votes. In Palm Beach alone, he got 3,400. You believe that ballot and the confusion tipped the balance to George W. Bush?
I do believe this, that the 3,400 votes, 3/4 of those would have gone to Al Gore. Even more important, the spoiled ballots there, the Buchanan-Gore ballots, I think ran to something like 12,000. I'm convinced that 99% of those intended to vote for Al Gore. I believe that Al Gore would have won based on the people's intent coming out to vote in Florida. I don't think there's any doubt about it, just to be honest.
Ralph Nader, let me show you the presidential vote in the state of Florida in the year 2000. George W. Bush, 2,912,790. Al Gore, 2,912,253. Nader, 97,488. Buchanan, 17,000. Bush won by 537. Of your 97,000 votes, every exit poll indicates that a disproportionate share of those would have gone to Al Gore. You could have given this election to Al Gore if you had not been on the ballot in Florida. Do you regret that today?
Of course not. You don't run for president to help elect your opponent. What isn't on that screen, Tim, is the exit polls showed that George W. Bush got 12 times more Democratic votes in Florida than I did. So that's that. What we're trying to do is build a political reform movement. The Green Party now is the third largest party in America, the fastest growing party. It won 25% of its local races last November. We hope that thousands of people will run and at the local, state, and national level in the year 2002. And it's very difficult, as Pat knows, for a third party to challenge the rigged two-party system. And not only do they have it rigged in terms of ballot access, getting on North Carolina, getting on these states, but they have it rigged with the private company they call the Debate Commission, without which, if you don't get on, you can't reach tens of millions of voters.
Having watched George W. Bush for a year, do you believe an Al Gore presidency would have been any different?
Well, it wouldn't have been any different in terms of military and foreign policy, corporate crime, soft on corporate crime. It wouldn't have been any different in ignoring the need to transfer our country to renewable energy and organic agriculture and protecting the small farmer, and wouldn't have been any different on GATT and NAFTA and the increasing trade deficits and exporting American jobs. It would have been different in certain areas. I don't think so much in civil liberties and civil rights. That the Democrats are very overrated. They under-enforced civil rights in the Justice Department in 8 years. But it would have been different on Social Security. It would have been different on little different on health insurance.
His cabinet would be different.
His cabinet would be different. But, you know, there's a permanent corporate government operating here. It doesn't matter who's
Would Al Gore have
president.
had a tax cut of the magnitude of George W. Bush?
Close.
Probably not. He wouldn't. But on the other hand, you never know. You never know. Each cycle, you see the least worst philosophy ending up with both parties getting worse, which is what I outline in the book.
You know, Tim, Ralph is right. We've got a one-party government here, both of them NAFTA, GATT, World Trade Organization, $450 billion trade deficit. Jobs are dying. Ford's cutting back. All these jobs going overseas. There's what I believe is going on is something like economic treason against the American worker and the loss of American sovereignty, and both parties are complicit. Now, what are we supposed to do who think that's killing our country? Sit there and say, vote Republican, vote Democrat because there's marginal difference? I think we did the right thing, and maybe it's going to come out all wrong, but I think you got to try. Someone has got to do something about, I believe, this interventionism and the open borders, because the security and survival of this country are at stake. I predicted in 1999 an act of cataclysmic terror on American soil if we didn't stop involving ourselves in places that are not America's concern, and if we didn't close these open borders that are letting people into this country, we know not who.
Ralph Nader, in your book, How to Tell the Truth and Still Run for President, Crashing the Party, what's the most important thing you learned in the election of 2000?
That the American people, whether they're liberals or conservatives, feel they've lost control over everything that matters to them. Their government, their elections, their democracy, their genes, their privacy, their workplace, their children, commercialization of childhood. And they have a thirst for taking control again. And that's what this book is all about, how to look forward and defeat the concentration of power that is keeping our country down, keeping America down in terms of a prosperous, just society to hand over to future generations.
Pat Buchanan, The Death of the West, How Dying Populations and Immigrant Invasions Imperil Our Country and Civilization. What's your thesis?
Thesis is quite simply that every single Western country is dying, and not a single country in Europe except Muslim Albania is the population and the birth rate sufficient to keep the country alive. The United States of America will be a third world country in terms of its population by 2050. Europe will be clearly dying. Russia will lose 33 million people. I think the whole world power strategy will change. I think the one lesson is the future is going to belong to the third world, not the West.
But the change of America has been ongoing. When the Mayflower came, Those are people from England. And then when the Irish came, and the Scots, and the Polish, and the Italians, people, oh my God, it's going to change America. And then came the Hispanics and the Vietnamese. We always change our color. America may be browner, maybe more yellow, perhaps a lot more people speaking Spanish as well as English. But what's wrong with that in terms of 100 years from now?
Well, you got to ask yourself, what is a country and what is a civilization? American civilization has a particular history, heroes, traditions. The folks coming in, say, from the Islamic world, the folks coming in from China and Asia, they're not Western folks. They are not, that's not their tradition. They're not going to take the greatest generation. What do they care about the greatest generation of Americans if you've got 100 million Mexican folks in here in the year 2050 and say 50 million Chinese and Asians? It is not going to be the America we know. It's going to die. Now,
won't they melt in the pot?
No,
the great melting pot.
The melting pot, Tim, is cracked and broken. Assimilation is not taking place. Americanization is not taking place. What is taking place is Balkanization. Go out west. They got separate graduations for African Americans, Asian Americans, Mexican Americans, white Americans. It's not working.
Let me just say, a foreign policy that backs dictators and oligarchies in other countries forces people to come here out of destitution and poverty and desperation. Most people do not want to leave their native lands, but they're forced to by a foreign policy that is extremely unreflective of the best spirit of the American people.
We have to go. Ralph Nader, you ever going to run for president again?
I'm not ruling it out. It's too early to say. I don't like long campaigns, but I do want to encourage a lot of people to run on the Green Party ticket at the local state
level. You may run
level.
in 2004.
No, I won't rule it out. I'm not going to say
Pat
now.
Buchanan, are you done with elective politics?
I think the American people have spoken pretty clearly to that issue, Tim.
Pat Buchanan, Ralph Nader. Ralph Nader, Crashing the Party. Pat Buchanan, Death of the West. Thank you very much for joining us now and during the course of the 2000 campaign.